few seconds and then I will begin. Well, good morning. Good morning to everybody. Welcome to New York Law School's City Law Breakfast. On behalf of New York Law School and Dean Anthony Crowell, I welcome you all to the 182nd City Law Breakfast that began back in 1994. I am Ross Sandler, Professor of Law and the Director of the Center for New York City Law. Thank you for attending and for helping to make these City Law Breakfasts an important public forum. I want to thank our three generous, loyal, and longstanding founding sponsors of these City Law Breakfasts. They are Consolidated Edison, Verizon, and the law firm of Greenberg Traurig. I also want to thank each of you for attending the breakfast. And we have almost 500 people signed up, and this is one of the largest breakfasts that we've had in several years. I want to thank especially those of you who made a voluntary contribution when you signed up to attend the breakfasts. We are thankful, and we will list your names on the email that we send out after the breakfast with the link to the video to everybody on our mailing list. We are enormously grateful for your voluntary contributions and your help in making the City Law Breakfast possible. After Brendan McGuire's prepared remarks, we will have a question and comment session. You may submit a question or a comment at any time during the breakfast. We will collect the questions and comments as they come in. To submit a question or comment, please use the Q&A function on your Zoom screen. And we do ask that you identify yourself with your first and last name and your organization. And then following the Q&A and comments, Anthony Crowell, Dean of the Law School, will join us for a conversation. We are delighted to welcome Brendan McGuire, Chief Counsel to Mayor Eric Adams, to our City Law Breakfast series. Brendan McGuire was born in New York City and graduated from Regis High School in Manhattan. He earned his college degree from Williams College and his law degree from NYU Law School. Brendan McGuire served for 11 years as an assistant United States attorney in the Southern District of New York, where he held major leadership positions supervising successful prosecutions of terrorism, international narcotics violations, and public corruption. In January 2022, he left the private law firm of Wilmer Hale to become Chief Counsel to Mayor Eric Adams. In his capacity as Chief Counsel, Brendan McGuire has a broad portfolio. His portfolio includes work on the needs of asylum seekers arriving in New York City, which is his topic for today. Brendan McGuire's public service is in keeping with his family's long and impressive legacy of public service. Brendan McGuire's grandfather, James McGuire, retired as a deputy chief inspector after 40 years with the New York City Police Department. Brendan McGuire's father, Robert McGuire, was the New York City Police Commissioner under Mayor Koch, and before that, he also served as an assistant United States attorney in the Southern District. Now, Brendan McGuire is adding a proud third generation of public service to New York City. I, as a longtime family friend, am honored to welcome Chief Counsel Brendan McGuire to New York Law School's City Law Breakfast Forum. Brendan, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Ross, for that introduction. It's wonderful to be here with you all. New York Law School is a special place for me, with close friends like you and Anthony and others. I wish we could all be in person together, but I guess one advantage of going virtual like this is I'm not keeping you all from any actual food. And I won't feel as bad for going on this morning. I will start this morning with just a little bit of background on my position here in City Hall, and then turn to the topic of the day, which is the city's current response to the asylum seeker challenge. Here in City Hall, the mayor who is a big believer in the value of lawyers. He has 5 deputy mayors, 3 of whom are lawyers. He has a chief of staff who is a lawyer, and he wanted to ensure that the legal presence in the counsel's office at City Hall was a strong one. And so we have a team here of lawyers, as Ross referenced, that really does all we can to support the leadership here in City Hall, in addition to obviously the mayor in particular. We serve a number of functions, internal compliance, ethics training, overseeing a number of agencies that are more legal in nature. For example, the Office of Labor Relations, the Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings, Mayor's Office of Contract Services, and the Human Rights Commission. And we also, as has been the tradition, work very closely with our partners at the Law Department on all manner of litigation that the city and City Hall are facing, employment matters and other legal issues. And it's a privilege to be able to be a part of this administration, to be able to serve the city, particularly at a time, I think, where there is so much change occurring in the city. And as we emerge from the pandemic, I think the city and its residents are really trying to figure out how we're going to redefine ourselves in the post-pandemic era. And I think, as New York has always done, it will prove to be resilient. It will prove those who doubted it wrong. And I think we will all come back stronger than ever. And I think that the topic I'm addressing today speaks to all the best of the city in so many ways. And one of the things that my office does is support the administration on challenges that cut across agencies and subject matters, whether that be Rikers Island, public safety related issues, and our topic today, asylum seekers. This has been one of the most acute challenges that we have faced in our first 10 months in office, for a number of reasons that I'll get into. But what has always been at the core of our approach to this and our response to the arrival of these individuals is obviously the history of the city and the history of the city in welcoming immigrants. Many of us are obviously fully familiar with that history, and all of us are, I'm sure, from families that were once, some recently, some less recently, a part of immigrant waves here to the city in some way, shape, or form. But to just kind of level set here a little bit, I'm gonna begin by talking a little bit about the history of asylum, the concept of asylum, and the history, obviously, briefly, of immigration to the city. Just to give a sense, today, immigrant New Yorkers make up almost 40% of the city's total population of nearly 9 million. And 60% of New Yorkers are either immigrants or children of immigrants. This is a major part of the city's identity, as we all know, and something I think that all New Yorkers take great pride in. And I think that this crisis and the city's response to it has been nothing less than extraordinary. And I deliberately use the word the city's response to it, and not this administration's response to it, because this effort has been an all city effort. It's an all hands on deck kind of moment, and so many elements, so many parts of the city raised their hands and extended a hand to help the more than 20,000, to date more than 20,000 men, women, and children who have arrived here in the city, really seeking the basics, seeking freedom, seeking security, and the foundation for a better life. And it's an incredible, just human story in terms of the outpouring that we have been able to be a part of. So let me just start with a brief overview of the concept of asylum, which many of you may already be familiar with. But the right to seek asylum, which is really what is at the core of what these individuals are seeking as they come over our southern border. It arose out of the horrors of the Holocaust. And in its aftermath, much of the world committed not to turn people away who were fleeing from their home countries in need of protection. And in the late 40s, early 50s, there was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which stated that everyone has the right to seek and to enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. There's also the 1951 United Nations Refugee Convention and a 1967 protocol, where really the most of the world really codified the idea that a refugee should not be returned to a country where they face serious threats to their life or to their freedom. And then in 1980, the US enacted the Refugee Act, which protected people who were fearing persecution on account of race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or based on a political opinion. And so the US has always been at the forefront of this effort. And the US's role and New York's and New York City's role has never been more important because of the reality that we face today. Because of, in part, the pandemic, the need for humanitarian protection for those who are seeking asylum is as high as it's ever been historically. There are estimates that at least as of mid-2020, that global displacement of individuals have reached a record of around 80 million people. Of these, according to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, approximately 26.3 million individuals were formally designated as refugees. 45 million are internally displaced persons. And then there are some number as well from particular countries. These are staggering numbers. And obviously New York City in the last year has only felt a small piece of this impact. But it does speak to the broader issue, and it's an example of a global challenge and a global problem having local impact here in New York because of its role as the capital of the world. And in terms of just a primer on the process for asylum, so that we all kind of understand what it is these individuals are trying to achieve, you must apply for asylum within 1 year of arriving in the U.S. And to be granted asylum, in short, you have to prove that you suffered persecution on account of a protected ground, or that you have a well-founded fear of future persecution as a result of one of the protected grounds that I listed earlier, if you were to return to your home country. And then if you receive asylum in that period, per that process, you can apply for a green card after a year. And then after 4 years, you can apply for citizenship. And you can also file petitions to bring family members to the U.S. So of course, in our past, this has resulted in major waves of individuals from other countries coming to the U.S. and coming to the city. There have been different policies in place over the years, as there has been a growing concern about the country, in some quarters, some believing that the country being overwhelmed by those coming in from other countries. And so that the federal policy at our ports of entry has been one that has changed, and it was also obviously impacted for a period of time by the pandemic. In March of 2020, really at the start of the pandemic, in response to COVID, the Trump administration utilized a provision in the Federal Public Health Service Act, which enabled the United States or authorized the U.S. to expel individuals to Mexico. And that was designed to really stop the influx of individuals coming, particularly over the southern border during COVID. And with this authority, it significantly, the Trump administration significantly limited the ability of individuals to apply for asylum. The Biden administration announced that it would stop using that provision But there was then litigation over that was initiated by a number of Republican states. And there was some court decisions that frustrated the Biden's administration to really peel that back. So this is obviously, as we all know, a hotly debated topic on the federal level. But while all of that is playing out, there are real world consequences as folks continue to arrive here in New York, as well as in other cities that are viewed as right to shelter or sanctuary cities, in particular Chicago and Washington, D.C. Now, the principal source of asylum seekers to the city over the last several months has been Venezuela. And some estimates put the total as high as 7 million Venezuelans who have fled their country in recent years. It is, by many measures, the largest displacement ever in the Western Hemisphere. This is due to political and economic unrest in Venezuela. And just to give a sense of what these folks are going through in order to get here to the city, and even before they get here to the city, just to get to the southern border with Mexico. The trek from Venezuela to the US border is about 3,000 miles. It is an extremely dangerous journey, natural causes as well as violence along the way in the countries that they have to pass through. And so the result here in terms of the geopolitical issues in Venezuela has led to a huge increase of people showing up at the US-Mexico border. In the first 11 months of this year, about 155,000 Venezuelans were encountered at the southern border. That's an increase of about 215% year over year from last year. And until a recent revision by the Biden administration last month, Venezuelans could not be returned either to Mexico or to Venezuela. And so the U.S. was in a position where they, to the extent there was a claim for asylum, where the U.S. had to accept these individuals. And most of them they were accepted and given immigration dates and released into communities in Texas and Arizona. That then created the situation that many of us have read about, which developed earlier this year, where the sort of combination of political strife and instability in Venezuela combined with political gamesmanship in Texas and Arizona really fed this crisis in New York, in the city. And as the mayor has explained, it's really a humanitarian crisis that started with violence and instability in South America and then was accelerated by American political dynamics. And so just to get a little bit more specific about how this began, as we kind of frame the problem before I will then go into the city's response. In April of this year, the governors of Texas and Arizona began sending buses of asylum seekers to Washington, D.C., Chicago, and New York. And then the city of El Paso soon followed. And there was no effort really at any point at the beginning, middle, or even today to coordinate that busing with any of the cities. To provide any of the cities with any meaningful notice of how many people, when they were coming, what buses to look out for, and no desire or really to work with us to try to ensure that the human beings on those buses were treated properly, and that we were as prepared as possible to welcome you. On peak days here in the city, both at Port Authority and sometimes other locations that we had to scramble to address, more than 10 buses would arrive with men, women, and families and children on them, unloading hundreds and hundreds of passengers all at once. Oftentimes they were carrying just the clothes on their back and one or two bags with nowhere else to go and obviously no resources. And just to give you a sense of the numbers, as of as of earlier this week. Over 22,600 asylum seekers have gone through the system and been offered a place to rest since the spring. And there are over 16,800 asylum seekers currently in our care here in the city today. And so that's about, there's a delta there of about 6,000 people, and we'll talk a little bit about the efforts that have been made to try to resettle those individuals. Many of those are individuals who had no intention of wanting to come to New York. They were either misled about where the bus that they were getting onto was going. They were misled about whether they might be able to get off on the way from the border to New York, or otherwise just confused about the process. And so a big objective, of course, of our response is understanding who in the group belongs in that category and how we can be helpful in connecting them with family members elsewhere in the U.S. Or helping them to build a foundation in areas other than the city. But I think it's potentially a fair question to ask, because earlier in October, in the first week of October, the mayor did make a direct speech to the city and declared this a humanitarian crisis. And some may reasonably ask, well, we're a city of almost 9 million. And we're talking now about slightly over 20,000 people being absorbed into the city. And folks are aware of the numbers of people that are being helped in the border states. Is it really fair to call this a crisis when you're talking about these numbers? And I would submit that resoundingly the answer to that is yes. And I think there are several reasons, but I will focus on just three. The first is what I mentioned before, which is the absence of coordination or advance warning. When any city receives an influx of thousands of people, sometimes hundreds all at once, who are here without any connection to the location, that is a very difficult situation to sustain for a day, for a week, but to do so over a period of 6 months is incredibly disruptive when you consider, and I'll get into all of the agencies and all of the resources that need to be focused to ensure that these individuals are cared for, that they're kept safe. So the absence of coordination from from those in the states and from the bus companies proved to be one of the real causes of this crisis situation. I think secondly, you're talking here about a high need population. These are individuals, many of whom who had stable lives back in their home countries, but who come and arrive in New York with incredible need, incredible health needs, education needs, childcare, legal needs. So these are not individuals who are able to get back on their feet quickly after arriving here. And so that requires an enormous effort by the city and by our nonprofit and community-based partners to support them, and particularly when you think about all of the children that have arrived. And that has always been one of the most important pieces of our response, and has been front of mind for us from the beginning, is to ensure that the trauma of all of this is minimized to the extent possible on the younger individuals who are arriving. And then I think the third reason why this really proved to be a crisis was there did not, until recently, when the federal policy was changed, there was no end game in sight. We were taking on this burden by ourselves effectively, along with all of our, as I said, partners here in the city. And the result was it was very difficult to plan for an end stage, because the flow along the border was obviously beyond our control. and we were not able to predict how high the numbers were going to go. And even as today, as we have said in the past, this will cost the city at least $500 million in terms of this response this year, and may very well approach $1 billion. So this is, I think, when you consider the price tag of this from a financial standpoint, I think there are many reasons why it can, I think, fairly be considered a humanitarian crisis. So that, I hope, helps to frame the problem, or I'll call it the challenge. And now just a few minutes about our response. As I mentioned, this was an extraordinary effort, an extraordinary all-encompassing response that involved an incredible number of city agencies. Under the direction of the mayor and the deputy mayor for Health and Human Services, Ann Williams-Isom, there was a task force formed, a multi-agency task force that began to meet regularly in the spring. And we very quickly brought together all of the key agencies, and I won't mention all of them, but the key agencies that really led on this were the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, the Department of Social Services, New York City Office of Emergency Management, the Department of Health, the Department of Education, Health and Hospitals, the NYPD. These are all agencies that, as you all know, have a few other priorities on their plates, even when there is not another crisis unfolding. And particularly in the wake of the pandemic, a number of those agencies have been stretched especially thin already. So this was really asking people to dig down deep and come together and work as quickly and efficiently as possible. And so very quickly in the spring, there was an intake center set up at Port Authority Bus Terminal, which is where the majority of the buses arrived. There were housing and other shelter services that were put in place within the city's shelter system. And I think that one of the things that's key to that and key to our response today is that the services that are needed by these asylum seekers differ in many important ways from the services that are needed by New York's homeless population. And so it was not as simple as just scaling up from what already existed. We also had to reach out to some of the leading, our nonprofit leaders, and Catholic Charities has been incredible, the Hispanic Federation as well, United Way, Make the Road, New York Immigration Coalition. They also have been really inundated in the wake of the pandemic, but did not hesitate to answer the call and continue today to be essential partners in all of this. And then, as I mentioned, there is also the community-based organizations who are too numerous to name, but who have been invaluable in assisting with the resettling of those and helping those who have arrived here who want to go on to other locations, getting them travel arrangements, ensuring that they have someone to receive them wherever they are going. And that's obviously an essential part of this strategy. And so in terms of a few numbers with respect to the city's response here, on October 7th, as I mentioned, the mayor declared a state of emergency based on the influx of these individuals and families seeking asylum. And he directed all city agencies to take all necessary steps to preserve health and public safety of these individuals as well as of New Yorkers. And because of the nature of our program here today, it should not go without mentioning that there's an enormous legal component to this. And the law department, the city law department did as they always do, mobilizing in a time of crisis where there are real legal challenges that need to be overcome and understood. And so in terms of the executive order that memorialized the mayor's declaration of a state of emergency, as well as a host of other very complicated legal issues. The law department was integral to the city's response and worked very closely with my team here in City Hall to make sure that we did everything we could to support those who were executing on the response. And so just in terms of numbers, since April 1st, the city has opened 57 emergency shelters. We have opened a humanitarian, what we call humanitarian emergency response and respite center, which we've, as we love to do in city government, create an acronym, which are called a HERC, which one of those is on Randall's Island, which has received some attention. That is for adult males and has an initial capacity of 500 people. We opened a second HERC for families with children at the Row Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. That has an initial capacity of 200 families. And then actually today, fittingly, we're opening a third HERC, which is focused on assisting single women and adult families. And that's in a hotel also in Midtown in Manhattan. And that will include 175 rooms. And so while the number of buses has slowed, our efforts in terms of building out, ensuring that we have sufficient capacity have not, because we can't take anything for granted, and we obviously don't control what may happen in the future at the border. And then I just want to say also a word about the navigation center, which the city stood up near Port Authority. This is, I think, just the epitome of New York. It's a full floor in the Red Cross building, which provides a full array of services to asylum seekers. And those services include ranging for health insurance, health care, mental health treatment, enrollment in school for children, providing asylum seekers with childcare, providing them with legal assistance, showing them how to enroll in ID NYC so that they can get a New York City identification card and begin to feel like a New Yorker. Interpreters in dozens of languages to ensure that language is not a barrier in doing this. And what I think, though, is just as telling and what I think is sort of classically New York is if you go to the city portal for this navigation center, which encourages asylum seekers to make appointments at the navigation center. You see the list of organizations based here in the city that are assisting people with understanding, getting to the portal, figuring out how to make an appointment, figuring out how to get to the building, understand what paperwork they may need, what questions they may have to answer, making them feel welcome. And I reviewed this morning before logging in the list on that portal. And I just think it shows why New York is New York and there's nothing else, there's no other city like it. You look down the list, and I'm just going to give a small representative sample of the organizations that are committed to welcoming these asylum seekers and making sure they get connected with appropriate services. African Communities Together, United Sikhs, Russian-speaking American LGBTQ+ Association, the Caribbean Women's Health Association. It's a small sample of this long list of organizations spanning the world, of all of the other representing all of the other immigrant communities that already call New York home. And they have now taken on this challenge and have partnered with the city and are every day doing more than this administration could do, more than this government could do in making these individuals and these families feel welcome. I also want to point out the importance of our dialogue here in City Hall and in partnership with the law department with some of the outside agencies who are advocates for these individuals, and particularly Legal Aid, Coalition for the Homeless, and the Office of Temporary Disability Assistance, and others. They have made sure that the interests and the rights of these individuals are never lost on us, even as we face these challenges. That we are not. They are constantly reminding us of what we need to do and what we need to adhere to. And we know what those requirements are, but they all play an essential role in ensuring that we are approaching this through the proper perspective, through the perspective of those who were impacted. And so that doesn't get a lot of headlines, but as lawyers, we all know that some of the most important work is done under the off the radar screen and behind the scenes. And that dialogue has been incredibly important for the success of this response as well. And so we're now in a place where as I said, because of this change, recent change on October 12th, shortly following the mayor's speech, the Biden administration announced that it would accept 24,000 Venezuelans under a humanitarian parole plan. And so under this program, Venezuelans who apply for the plan must have someone in the US who can financially support them for 2 years. And it's similar to a program that has been adopted for Ukrainian asylum seekers. And the administration also announced, importantly, that those from Venezuela who cross illegally into the US will now be sent back to Mexico. And that Mexico has now, while they previously did not, they are now agreeing to accept Venezuelans who are attempting to cross illegally and not through proper ports of entry into the United States. That is the key factor, really, in the last month or so that has resulted in a significant reduction in the number of buses coming here to the city. We're still having folks arrive, but it's not nearly at the rate from just a few weeks ago. And so we are now able to take a bit of a breath here in terms of understanding where we are, reviewing what we're doing well, what we could be doing better, and make sure that we have sufficient capacity in the event that the numbers increase in the future. So as we look ahead to the coming weeks and months, we have some real needs as we're still caring for so many of these individuals. Needs in terms of emergency financial relief. One of the other things that the administration is really laser focused on is legislation allowing asylum seekers to get work authorization more quickly. Currently, the system is designed to take at least 6 months, and oftentimes takes much longer. And many of these individuals want to get on their feet professionally. They want to get jobs. They want to contribute to the life of the city and the financial well-being of the city. And so we are very much focused on that issue in particular. And then, of course, we are calling for what everyone is calling for, which is bipartisan immigration reform, so that this country can really tackle this in a much more humane and ordered way than it has to date. So I think, to conclude, our senator from New York, Robert Kennedy, once I think put it very simply and elegantly. Our attitude toward immigration reflects our faith in the American ideal, and I think that some days lose sight of that, and I think we try to remember each and every day as we're approaching these challenges, that our children are watching, that our young people are watching. How we treat these individuals, these families, these children who are in such need, and who are simply looking, as I said at the top, for freedom, security, and the foundation for a better life. And so it's with that humanity that we try to approach this problem every day, but balanced with the reality that there is a city here, and that there are nearly 9 million New Yorkers whose needs we also have to be sensitive to as we move forward together with all of our partners who have been so instrumental in this response. So that concludes my remarks. My apologies as I look now at the time if I went a little bit over my prescribed time, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you. That was terrific. And If I did just take a moment to talk about what we're doing here, I think it's so important to let public officials who are handling such important problems free airtime to explain it and to take the time without questions and interruptions and the kind of things that go on other sources. So thank you for that complete discussion. We really appreciate it. Let me start with the first question from Professor Lenny Benson of the New York Law School. She says, I appreciate the efforts the city is making to expand services of the recent arrivals. Our law school provides annual asylum law conference each year and partners with several nonprofits. We've been part of the discussions with nonprofits seeking to serve all immigrants, especially those on the immigration court's rush dockets. We will be partnering with Immigrant ARC, a nonprofit collaborative on offering training and support. It'd be wonderful if the audience could know about our training and plan to attend the next conference. Past trainings are available, and it would be wonderful if the city would authorize city attorneys to do pro bono work as well. Years ago, the attorneys for city council were cleared to work with me in screening immigrants. So that's the question. What about that?
Yes, we could certainly look into that, and I think that there is the lawyers at the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs have been coordinating the legal representation opportunities on behalf of the administration. And so I would be happy to connect the professor with the special counsel there at the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. We obviously want to do everything we can to take full advantage of our lawyers in response to this. So be happy to do that and look into it further.
Jeremy Fagelson and another questioner asked about relationships with the states and other cities. And the question from Jeremy Fagelson is, Mayor Adams said publicly in September that the city might sue Texas. Is there any update you can share on that or negotiations?
So I would say this. I mean, we have been with both internally and externally have had conversations about all potential legal tools, and including affirmative litigation. There's no update on that right now. We have explored, I think, all options. There have been, as you might imagine, a lot of lawyers in the city who have a few opinions on what the city should be doing or could be doing legally, and we've seriously considered all of those. But as of right now, we have not seen a worthwhile path in terms of affirmative litigation. We have really tried to, as the second part of Jeremy's question indicates, we have really tried to focus more on negotiation and hoping that that's a more productive path forward at this point.
Richard McKeon says, I was observing immigration court yesterday, and there was a steady stream of asylum seekers who were unable to find an attorney to represent them. Many nonprofits are overwhelmed and can't accept new cases due to lack of funding. What is New York City doing to provide funding to nonprofits? So I guess this is a similar question about the need for lawyers and what more could be done.
Yeah, this is a really complicated challenge right now for the city. The city has hundreds of vacancies for lawyers within it. We know that our partners in the DA's offices, in the institutional defender's offices are all challenged in terms of their rates of attrition. Lawyers now who are doing work for those engaging with the city, whether on behalf of the city or those who are appearing across from the city, are just doing incredible work right now because of the wake of the pandemic. The success, I think, of private law firms and their ability to pay at a rate that is much higher than the city, the issue of hybrid work. There are a lot of factors here at play that have led to multiple crises, really, in terms of legal capacity. And we are looking at that. We announced just earlier this week a new program where we were going to have an inaugural class of New York City legal fellows who will be seconded from a handful of large law firms. That's by no means going to address the whole problem. But the goal here is to really try to expand the city's relationship given we're in the legal capital of the world, with all of the lawyers in the city, and we recognize we do not have the monopoly on all the good ideas here in the city, and so welcome any thoughts. The problem is, to the extent, ideas are based on funding, that's obviously an issue that cuts across beyond the legal sector. And so we are trying to be as creative as possible here and use, and stretch every dollar as much as we can. But it is a fair question, and it's one that we're actively dealing with, but it certainly does not have any easy answer.
Yeah, that reflects back also to Professor Benson's comment about training and the opportunities to train lawyers. Lawyers who are going to help the immigrants need to know, like what all lawyers need to know. So here's a question from David Condiff. He says, and this is a compliment to you, having worked for 4 New York City mayors, I was so impressed that you spent an afternoon last week at John Jay, deeply listening to a discussion on issues involving the closing of Rikers Island. What lessons did you draw from that discussion? So we're shifting topics, but this is important too.
It's very important, and I appreciate that. It was just for everybody's benefit. It was a half-day symposium hosted by John Jay, who's such an important institution here in the city, and it was about being halfway in terms of the timeline, in terms of the closing of Rikers Island. And I think the principal takeaway that I had from there is the depth of feeling in terms of the moral imperative that so many people feel about the need to close Rikers. I think hearing from those who have been imprisoned there, hearing from family members, and also hearing from the heroic officers and those who provide social services and medical services there, who go in every day, is incredibly challenging environment, and it is an issue that the mayor and we have taken incredibly seriously since day one, because it really is an area where the city can do so much better, but it is generational in terms of the depth of the problems. But I think really the commitment, and this is the experience I've had in the first year across the board. The commitment that folks have to Rikers, which is really based in their concern for and love for fellow New Yorkers, is really what struck me the most about that symposium, and how many people really want to have a constructive dialogue on this, which of course we welcome, which is why I was really happy to spend the time there.
Here's from David Wilkins. Has the city done any advocacy efforts with the Biden administration, specifically with DHS-ICE, to alleviate the logjam with check-ins at the ICE office at 26 Federal Plaza? Immigrants are forced to camp out overnight to comply with the check-in requirements. So these are the kind of issues that normally cross City Hall's desk, but there they are.
No, it's a good question, and I had in my outline, but I skipped it because I felt I was going on too long. The degree of coordination and negotiation and appeals that we have made, not just to our partners in the federal government, but also in the governor's office and in Albany. The dialogue has almost been daily during this crisis on both levels. And to answer your question, it is absolutely a problem, because we have a situation where even if these folks do everything right, and even if the city is supporting them as they wait to process their paperwork and make their initial appearance in front of an immigration judge, if the number of immigration judges is too few, if the number of support staff in immigration court, the 26 Federal Plaza, is too low, and folks are waiting online, and then they're missing their appointments, and then they have to reschedule, that is only going to obviously compound the city's challenge as we care for these individuals and attempt to move them along in the process. So that is an area, a top priority for us as we continue to have constructive dialogue with the Biden administration. But again, this is a resource issue. They have a lot of immigration resources and personnel stationed at the border, and it's something that really does need to be addressed for the reasons that you state. We are trying to figure out whether we at the city level can do anything to try, from a logistical standpoint or otherwise, to try to alleviate that burden, because seeing lines wrapped around the building is obviously something that needs to be addressed as urgently as possible.
Here's a question from Cassidy Strong, a student at New York Law School. You spoke about the sheer number of asylum seekers coming to the city. Has this slowed down at all, or are there still busloads of people arriving? And can you give us any numbers?
Sure. So it has slowed, and it has slowed significantly over the last month since the administration changed the policy that I described earlier. And so now this is sort of this week, last week, the numbers are much more manageable. They're certainly on any given day typically below 100. And much different than the days before that, when some days they could be around 1,000. And so that has made an enormous difference. But in terms of the numbers, as I said, we have nearly 23,000 asylum seekers who have come through our system, and we have nearly 17,000 right now currently in our care, spread out among the different facilities that we have stood up.
Here's from Jack Krauskoff, good friend. Does the proposed legislation to work with financial assistance for asylees include any other immigrants, such as those who qualify for DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival?
So that is part of the discussion, and one of the parts of this discussion is what is the scope? What would be the scope of a change to the work authorization requirements? And we obviously have to be very sensitive here. There are many different groups that are impacted by a change in this policy, and there are many different groups that are here that want to get to work as soon as possible. And so the scope of that is certainly a part of the discussion, and one that we're trying to push on, because in some sense, getting some momentum behind even some modest change to this requirement, I think we would hope would cause some momentum in the right direction. But again, everybody's I think in the right place on this, but it is a question of mobilizing legislators. It's a question of resources, which, as we all know today, is no easy feat on any level of government.
I'm sorry, we're going to have to end the question period now. We have many more questions. I'm delighted there were so many, but now let's turn to Dean Anthony Crowell for a colloquy with Brendan McGuire.
Thanks so much, Ross. I appreciate that. Brendan, it's great to see you. And
see you.
Thank you for a really wonderful, not only presentation, but it was a real briefing. It was a briefing for New Yorkers, everything that you need to understand and really appreciate about the depth of thought that the city has undertaken in really trying to address a crisis and to give so many people a better life and an opportunity. It's certainly not lost on me as I look out my window here at 26 Federal Plaza that you're just a couple blocks away, and the import of all that. And certainly you're no stranger to the Civic Center. I want to ask a couple of questions more on the human side of the public lawyering process, and in your, I'd like to call it a new role, but as I used to say, for every 1 year in City Hall, it's probably worth 3 years anywhere else. What's the best advice you got from your dad about how to approach the job? I will say, I had the great privilege of working with your dad 20 years ago on a charter revision commission. And so I know his wisdom, and I'd love to hear what he told his son as you entered City Hall. And
well, as you said, Anthony, he had the benefit of working with you, and he knew that you had previously sat in my seat here. So the main thing he led with was just do everything Anthony tells you to do, which I was really doing anyway. But no, I think in seriousness, I mean, he's always been my role model, along with my mom. And I think probably two things, which I think probably his dad told him, which, number one is get up every day, put your suit on, and do the job that you were hired to do. Don't focus on the next job. Don't focus on what other people are doing. Do your best at what you've been hired to do. Do your best to serve the mayor. Do your best to serve the city. And then I think related to that is you're not going to meet any finer group of people than those who you will meet through your service to the city. And that ultimately, at the end of this, it's all about your relationships with those people, with your colleagues. And oftentimes, some of the best relationships will be with those who you're across the table from. And that was his experience. And so the richness of his relationships at this stage of his life is proof of that. And so I'm doing my best on both counts.
I think that's great advice about certainly being present in the moment and certainly thinking about what this task involves, which is so wide ranging. I'd love to hear about your initial thoughts about what did you think the job would be, and how do you view it now in terms of the role of the chief counsel? I will just preface that by saying many just think it's a lawyering role. I think it is an Uber management role like none other. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Sure. I think that's right. And well, I in all seriousness, I did have the benefit of your experience and speaking also with my immediate predecessor, Kapelangani, and others who have been lawyers here in City Hall, all of which was enormously helpful. So I did feel a bit prepared. But I do think what I think you realize, for me, the most in this seat is you realize what I think a lot of lawyers in different positions, particularly in government, realize is that the legal threads run through in so many different directions and cut across so many different verticals, as they say, or subject matters. And I think that if you can establish, to me, what has been really important is trying to establish a culture here and a set of relationships here where the lawyers are viewed as supporters, as facilitators. We are not viewed as yellow or red lights. And we respect those with subject matter expertise, and we are not trying to intrude into their expertise, into their lanes. But we are here when needed to support in any way possible. And that, as you say, Anthony, does require a degree of management. Because there are oftentimes these challenges that cut across and involve multiple deputy mayors and involve, particularly those where the mayor is prioritizing issues himself. And so really being able to understand who the client is in different cases and trying to be as responsive and supportive of them. And that really can change day by day on the very same matter. And so I think you're right. For me, it is really, to me, I went to law school because I felt like a law degree was the most versatile degree one could get. And I didn't really have a clue as to what I wanted to do. But I think the versatility of the degree is really, that for me is what's really come home in this job because there's really so much you can do with it. And it's why I think city service, whatever position you're in as a lawyer for the city, it just allows you to do so many different things, not just legally, but also from a policy standpoint and operational standpoint.
Right. The policy and operations is a huge component of the role. I remember someone asked me, it was a discussion about leadership, and they said, how do you define yourself in City Hall? And I hadn't necessarily prepared an answer, but the answer that came to mind and made most sense, and even to this day makes most sense, is connective tissue. That there is a role for the chief counsel. There is a role for the team, and I must say you have a fabulous team. I've gotten to know your team, and I had the great privilege of working with Bill Heinzen, who was my deputy in City Hall. The connective tissue aspect cannot be undervalued. It is about navigating the gaps between the different portfolios of deputy mayors, the agency questions that come up, and trying to pull everything together in a lot of ways, particularly where there are significant legal questions and legal questions that will influence operational decisions. I think you very much so underscored how that was at play in terms of standing up the response to this humanitarian crisis. But how else is it coming into play for you on a day-to-day basis?
So, I mean, I think you're exactly right, Anthony, in terms of the connective tissue point, and Bill Heinzen is the embodiment of connective tissue. Like you, there isn't a person, I don't think, in city government, past, present, or future, that he does not know. And that is hugely important because at the end of the day, this is all built on relationships. And I think that for me, there's a counseling element to this job. And that's really those who try to serve as connective tissue do so well. And that to me, oftentimes I think when people think of people who are in roles as counsel or lawyers in general, oftentimes I think we immediately think about talking and advice, and what advice are you giving and what are you saying? And I think really what the key is listening, and it's active listening, and it's understanding where people are coming from, and it's not just listening to those internally, but it's listening. It's being humble enough and secure enough to take the various opinions coming at you from the outside, because you really are in a fishbowl. And so for me, that's always been a key part to the job, and for our team is to take the time to listen to those who we're serving, because at the end of the day, so many of these problems are novel, they're complex, and if you're not hearing what your clients are going through, your solutions are not going to be what they really need, and they may be incomplete. And so, my wife would certainly say that I have no business talking at all about the ability to listen, and she's probably right. But for me, that is a key component of all of this, and really to the counseling function.
Thanks so much. Ross has signaled to me that we are at time. I'm going to invite him back onto the screen, and we'll talk about our next program. But thank you, Brendan. This was tremendous, and we are all extremely grateful, not only for your service and leadership, but for the breadth and scope of what the entire administration has had to tackle as it came into office during amongst the most difficult times anyone could imagine. So our heartfelt thanks to you and the mayor and the entire team.
Well, thank you, Anthony, and a heartfelt thanks back to you for all of your support, just not me personally, but for so many of us in this administration for so long now. You know how grateful all of us are, but just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Well, thank you for a really important morning, both on the topic of asylum seekers and migrants to New York City, but also a discussion about the lawyers at City Hall and about the work of lawyers in government. We really appreciate the talk. I think it was really quite a remarkable talk. And I know that I'm going to send a copy to your father and your mother, and I know they'll be very proud.
I think they're on, Ross.
Thank you all. We will be back in December with Chancellor Banks. You'll all get a notice, and I look forward to see you again. Thank you so much for attending the City Law Breakfast.